The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not the trees. Not the cold mountain air. It was the smell of something rotten, drifting through the woods outside my cabin at 3 in the morning. Then I heard footsteps circling the walls. Slow. Careful. Like someone was trying not to be heard. I booked the cabin because I needed silence. My job had been destroying my sleep for months, and my friend told me about this isolated place deep in the mountains of Colorado where nobody bothered you. No tourists. No phone signal. Just forest. At first it felt perfect. The cabin sat alone near a narrow dirt road surrounded by endless pine trees. The nearest gas station was almost 40 minutes away. The owner gave me the keys at a small store down the mountain and warned me the weather could get rough at night. I arrived just before sunset. Everything looked normal. Old wooden cabin. Rusted grill outside. Tiny porch. 1 bedroom. 1 bathroom. No neighbors in sight. The silence out there felt heavy. That first night, I sat on the porch drinking beer and listening to the forest. Wind moving through trees. Crickets. Branches creaking. Then, somewhere far off in the woods, I heard a whistle. 1 short whistle. I froze for a second, listening carefully, but nothing followed. I figured it was probably another hiker nearby. Still, it bothered me. The next day I went hiking around the trails near the cabin. The forest was dense enough that sunlight barely reached the ground. I kept getting this weird feeling that someone was behind me. Every time I stopped walking, the sounds behind me stopped too. At one point I turned around quickly because I heard leaves crunching nearby. Nothing. Just trees. But later, while heading back to the cabin, I found something strange. Fresh boot prints. Not mine. They were pressed deep into the mud beside the trail, heading in the same direction I was going. I remember crouching beside them and realizing they looked recent. Really recent. I tried convincing myself they belonged to another camper. But the deeper I got into the woods, the more nervous I felt. That night, rain started pouring around midnight. Heavy rain. The kind that shakes the windows. I woke up suddenly to a loud thump outside. My eyes opened immediately. Another thump. From the side of the cabin. I sat up in bed listening carefully. The rain made it hard to hear anything clearly, but then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow footsteps crunching through wet gravel outside. I checked the clock. 凌晨3点14分. At first I thought maybe an animal wandered near the porch. But the footsteps sounded deliberate. Human. Step. 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 Moving around the cabin. I grabbed the flashlight beside my bed and looked through the bedroom window. Nothing. Just darkness and rain. Then the footsteps stopped completely. For maybe 30 seconds everything went quiet except the storm. And then 3 knocks hit the front door. Soft. Knock, knock, knock. Every hair on my body stood up. Nobody should have been out there. Not at that hour. I didn't move. Another 3 knocks came. Slightly louder this time. Then silence. I stayed frozen in bed for almost 10 minutes before finally forcing myself to walk toward the living room. I remember my heart beating so hard I could hear it. I aimed the flashlight toward the front window. No one there. But the muddy footprints on the porch were clear as day. Someone had been standing right outside the door. I locked every window and stayed awake until sunrise. The next morning I almost packed up and left, but honestly, I felt stupid. I kept trying to explain everything logically. Maybe some drunk hiker. Maybe someone needing help. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That afternoon I drove down to the gas station for supplies. I casually mentioned the footsteps to the cashier, expecting him to laugh it off. Instead, he got quiet. Then he asked me which cabin I rented. When I told him, his face changed immediately. He said, "You staying there alone?" I nodded. He stared at me for a second before saying, "Lock your doors tonight." That was it. He refused to explain further. I drove back feeling sick to my stomach. By evening the forest felt different somehow. Too quiet. Even the insects sounded distant. Around 10 p.m. I heard something outside again. Not footsteps this time. Breathing. Right outside the bedroom window. Slow, heavy breathing. I stopped moving instantly. The curtain beside the bed was slightly open, and beyond the glass was complete darkness. Then I saw it. A face. Just barely visible outside the window. A man. Standing completely still in the dark, staring directly at me. I jumped back so hard I hit the wall. The second I moved, the face disappeared. I grabbed the flashlight and ran to the living room, but before I could reach the front door, I heard footsteps sprinting across the porch outside. Fast. Heavy. Then silence again. I locked myself in the bathroom with a kitchen knife for nearly an hour before finally calling the police, but there was no signal. None. That's when I heard the sound that still ruins my sleep. The cabin door slowly creaking open. I know I locked it. I know I did. The footsteps inside were careful and slow. Wood creaking softly under heavy boots. I held my breath in the bathroom, gripping the knife so hard my hand cramped. The footsteps stopped right outside the bathroom door. Then came a soft whistle. The same whistle I heard my first night. One short whistle. Whoever was outside knew I was in there. I remember staring at the doorknob, waiting for it to turn. Seconds passed. Then minutes. Nothing. Finally, I heard footsteps walking away through the cabin. Then the front door closing again. I stayed in that bathroom until sunrise. The second daylight hit, I ran outside and threw my bags into the car. And that's when I saw the marks. Deep scratches carved into the wooden wall beside my bedroom window. Not random scratches. Words. Tall, shaky letters dug deep into the wood. I saw you first. My stomach dropped. I got in my car and drove straight back to the gas station. When I told the cashier someone broke into the cabin, he looked terrified. Then he finally told me the truth. A man had been living in those woods for years. Former hunter. Survivalist. Completely unstable. A couple renting that same cabin disappeared 2 years earlier. Police searched the forest for weeks but never found them. The man was never caught. As I was leaving, the cashier quietly asked me something I'll never forget. "Did you check under the bed before you slept there?" I said no. He nodded slowly and looked away. Then he said, "That's where the last couple found him." I woke up because someone was slowly dragging their fingers across the outside wall of my cabin. Scratch. Scratch. At first I thought it was a branch moving in the wind. But then it stopped directly beside my head, and I heard breathing. Heavy breathing. I froze under the blanket and listened. The cabin I rented was deep in the mountains of northern Montana. No neighbors. No phone signal. Just endless trees and one dirt road that stretched for miles. I had booked the place for a week after a rough breakup. I wanted silence. Somewhere isolated. By the third night I regretted it. The owner had warned me before leaving. "Lock the doors after dark," he said casually. "Sometimes hikers wander around drunk." At the time I laughed. Now, lying in bed at 2:13 in the morning, hearing someone breathing inches away from the wall, I wasn't laughing anymore. I stayed completely still. The scratching started again. Slow. Deliberate. Like someone testing the wood with their fingernails. Then footsteps moved around the cabin. Crunch. Crunch. The gravel outside shifted carefully beneath heavy boots. I grabbed my flashlight and sat up slowly. My heart was pounding so hard it actually hurt. I looked toward the window beside the bed, but the curtains were closed. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then 3 knocks. Not loud. Soft. Almost polite. I didn't answer. A full minute passed before I finally worked up the courage to peek through the curtain. Nothing. Just darkness and pine trees moving in the wind. I told myself it was probably some lost hiker messing around. Maybe someone drunk. Maybe someone trying to scare tourists. Still, I checked the locks twice. I barely slept after that. The next morning I found footprints outside the cabin. One set. Large boot prints. They circled the entire place. I noticed something else too. The prints stopped directly outside my bedroom window for a long time. The dirt there was deeper, more pressed down, like whoever stood there had been watching me for several minutes. I should have left then. But I didn't. I convinced myself I was overreacting. That afternoon, I drove into the nearest town about 40 minutes away. Tiny place. One gas station. One diner. I casually mentioned the footprints to the waitress while paying for coffee. Her expression changed immediately. "Did you see his face?" she asked. I laughed nervously. "Whose face?" She didn't answer right away. Then she leaned closer. "There's a guy who hides in those woods sometimes," she whispered. "People report him every few years. Mostly hunters." Cold chills spread through my chest. "What does he do?" "He watches cabins." I stared at her. "That's it. That's enough." She refused to say anything else after that. I left feeling sick to my stomach. The drive back to the cabin felt longer than usual. The forest suddenly looked different. Every tree seemed too close to the road. Too quiet. When I reached the cabin, something felt wrong immediately. The front door was slightly open. Just an inch. I knew I locked it. I stood there frozen for nearly 30 seconds before finally stepping inside. Nothing looked stolen. The kitchen was untouched. My bag was still there. But my bedroom door was open. I was sure I had closed it before leaving. The air inside the room smelled strange. Sweat and dirt. Then I noticed the blanket on my bed. Someone had been lying there. There was an indentation on the mattress. Deep enough to still be visible. I backed out of the cabin instantly. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys into the dirt. I should have driven away immediately. Instead, I made the dumbest decision of my life. I waited. I wanted proof I wasn't crazy. So that night, I turned off every light in the cabin and sat in the corner with a flashlight and a hunting knife from the kitchen. Hours passed. Nothing. Just wind outside. Trees creaking. I almost started feeling stupid again. Then, around 1 a.m., I heard footsteps outside the cabin. Slow footsteps. Careful footsteps. Not random. Someone trying not to make noise. I turned off the flashlight immediately. The footsteps circled the cabin once. Then twice. Then they stopped outside the living room window. I could hear breathing again. Closer this time. I held my breath and stared into the darkness. That's when I heard the window screen move. Very slowly. A soft metallic scrape. He was taking it off. Every muscle in my body locked up. The window slid upward maybe 2 inches. Then stopped. I saw fingers appear underneath it. Dirty fingers. Then a second hand. The window lifted higher. I finally snapped. I screamed as loud as I could and rushed toward the window with the flashlight. The beam hit a man's face for less than a second. I still think about that face sometimes. Middle-aged. Filthy beard. White eyes. Smiling. Not surprised. Not scared. Like he'd done this before. He disappeared instantly into the darkness. I slammed the window shut and locked myself in the bathroom with my car keys. I stayed there until sunrise holding the knife. The entire night I heard movement outside. Footsteps. Branches snapping. Breathing near the walls. Once, I heard him laugh quietly. The moment the sun came up, I ran to my car and drove straight to town. I went directly to the sheriff's office. They searched the woods later that day. About half a mile behind the cabin, they found a campsite hidden between rocks and trees. Inside the tent were photographs. Dozens of them. Pictures of different cabins. Different tourists. People sleeping through windows. People changing clothes. People sitting by campfires completely unaware they were being watched. Then they found pictures of me. Photos taken through my bedroom window during the first 2 nights. The last picture was taken while I was asleep. In the photo, someone was standing beside my bed, smiling directly at the camera. The knocking started at exactly 2:13 a.m. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just 3 slow taps on the cabin window beside my bed, deep in the mountains where the nearest road was almost 20 miles away. I froze the second I opened my eyes. At first I thought it was a branch hitting the glass. The storm outside had been getting worse for hours. Wind screamed through the trees around the cabin, and rain hammered the roof hard enough to shake the walls. But then it happened again. Tap, tap, tap. Slow. Controlled. Like someone standing outside, trying to let me know they were there. I didn't move for almost a minute. I just listened. Nothing. Then I slowly reached for my phone. No signal. The battery was at 9%. I remember staring toward the window beside the bed, barely able to see it in the darkness. The cabin only had one working lamp, and I'd turned it off before sleeping. Outside the glass was complete blackness. Just rainwater sliding down the window. Then lightning flashed. For half a second, the woods lit up white. And I saw a man standing beside the cabin. He wasn't looking at the window. He was facing the forest, perfectly still. The lightning vanished and everything went black again. My stomach dropped instantly. I sat up fast and grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand. By the time I pointed it outside, nobody was there. I told myself it was probably another hiker. Maybe someone lost in the storm. Maybe I imagined how close he looked. But something felt wrong. The cabin belonged to my uncle. He used it during hunting season, but nobody had been there in months. It sat alone in the mountains, surrounded by thick forest and abandoned logging roads. I'd gone there alone for a 4-day vacation because I wanted silence and no phone calls. Big mistake. I didn't sleep after that. Around 4 a.m., I heard footsteps outside. Not random movement. Actual footsteps. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Slow circles around the cabin. The floorboards creaked under me as I quietly moved toward the front window. I kept the flashlight off. The footsteps stopped. Then I heard breathing. Very close. Not inside the cabin. Right outside the front door. I backed away without making a sound. Every hair on my arms stood up. I could literally hear this person breathing through the thin wood. Then the doorknob moved. Just a tiny movement at first. Click. Then harder. Click. Click. I grabbed the old rifle my uncle kept above the fireplace. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The breathing stopped. Silence again. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps walking away from the cabin toward the trees. I stayed awake until sunrise with the rifle pointed at the door. The next morning, the storm had passed. Fog covered everything outside. I checked around the cabin expecting to find footprints in the mud. I found them immediately. Boot prints. One person. They circled the cabin over and over during the night. Some of the prints stopped directly outside my bedroom window. What bothered me most was where the tracks led. Not away from the cabin. Toward the old tool shed behind it. The shed sat maybe 50 yards away near the tree line. I hadn't opened it since arriving. I remember standing there debating whether to check it or just leave immediately. But my car wouldn't start. The cold during the storm had killed the battery. So I grabbed the rifle and walked to the shed. The door was slightly open. I knew for a fact it had been closed before. I pulled it open slowly. Inside smelled like mold and wet wood. At first I didn't notice anything strange. Just old tools. Rusted chains. Boxes. Then my flashlight landed on the back corner. There was a sleeping bag there. Fresh food wrappers. Water bottles. Someone had been living inside that shed. Recently. My chest tightened immediately. I backed out fast and turned toward the cabin. And saw movement between the trees. A man. watching me. He was far enough away that I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could tell he was tall and skinny. Dark jacket. Hood up. The second my flashlight hit him, he walked behind a tree and disappeared. Not ran. Walked. Like he wasn't afraid at all. I sprinted back to the cabin and locked every door. The entire day I kept seeing movement outside. Small things. Shadows between trees. Branches moving when there was no wind. Once I heard footsteps on the porch again around noon. When I looked through the window, nobody was there. Then I noticed something nailed to the front door. A dead rabbit. Its throat cut open. I honestly think that was the moment real panic hit me. This wasn't some lost hiker. Someone had been watching me since I arrived. And now he wanted me scared. I decided to leave on foot before night came. The main road was about 18 miles downhill. Long hike, but better than staying there another night. I packed everything fast and left around 4 p.m. For the first hour, everything seemed normal. The logging trail was muddy and quiet except for birds and dripping water from the trees. Then I started hearing footsteps behind me. Far back at first. Crunch, crunch. Whenever I stopped walking, the sound stopped too. I kept telling myself it was an animal. But deep down, I already knew. After another 20 minutes, I finally turned around. Nobody there. Just trees. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Fresh boot prints in the mud behind me. Not mine. I started walking faster. The footsteps came back. Closer now. I could hear branches snapping somewhere behind the trees beside the trail. He wasn't trying to hide anymore. I broke into a run. My backpack bounced hard against my shoulders as I sprinted downhill. I could hear him running too now. Fast. Heavy footsteps crashing through the woods beside me. I remember gasping for air and slipping in mud, nearly falling. Then I saw the old ranger station near the road ahead. Maybe 200 yards away. I ran toward it as hard as I could. And that's when I heard him scream. Not words. Just this raw, angry scream from the trees behind me. I reached the ranger station door and slammed into it. Locked. I turned around. And saw him step out from the woods. For the first time I saw his face clearly. Thin. Pale. Dirty beard. Sunken eyes. And he was smiling. He had a hunting knife in one hand. In the other hand, he was holding my phone charger. The one from inside the cabin. Meaning he'd been inside while I slept. He started walking toward me slowly. I remember raising the rifle with shaking hands and screaming at him to stop. But he kept smiling. Kept walking. Then he suddenly sprinted at me. I fired without thinking. The shot echoed through the mountains. He dropped instantly. I stood there frozen, unable to breathe. But the worst part came after. When the police finally searched the area later that night, they found a small campsite deep in the woods behind my cabin. Inside it were dozens of photographs. Pictures of hikers. Campers. Tourists. All taken secretly from far away. Some photos showed people sleeping inside tents. Some showed them through cabin windows at night. And at the bottom of the pile, they found pictures of me. From my first day there. Including one taken through my bedroom window while I was asleep. I woke up to someone breathing outside my tent. Not walking. Not whispering. Just breathing. Slow. Deep. Right beside my head. At first I thought it was part of a dream. My eyes stayed closed while I listened to the sound scrape through the cold mountain air. Then I realized something worse. My dog wasn't growling. He was completely silent. That terrified me more than the breathing. I had gone camping alone in northern Montana during late October. It was supposed to be a 3-day hiking trip before the heavy snow started. I wanted quiet. No phone service. No people. Just woods and mountains. I brought my dog Ranger because he'd been with me on dozens of trips before. Big German Shepherd. Smart. Protective. Nothing scared him. The first day was normal. Cold wind. Empty trails. I didn't see a single person after leaving the ranger station. By sunset, I reached a clearing near an old fire road that looked abandoned for years. I set up camp beside a line of dead pine trees. Everything felt fine, until night came. The woods changed after dark. The wind stopped completely. No insects. No birds. Just silence so heavy it made my ears ring. Around midnight, Ranger suddenly lifted his head. He stared into the trees. Not barking. Not moving. Just staring. I whispered his name, but he ignored me. His ears stayed pointed toward the forest like he was listening to something far away. Then I heard it. Crunch. A single footstep. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the trees, but there was nothing there. Just trunks and darkness. Another crunch. Closer this time. Ranger slowly stood up and moved against my leg. His body felt stiff. Nervous. That wasn't normal. I unzipped the tent slightly and shined the flashlight around the campsite. Sleeping bag. Cooler. Fire pit. Empty woods. Then the light caught something behind a tree. A shape. Someone was standing there. I froze instantly. The figure didn't move. I couldn't see a face, just a dark outline partially hidden behind the trunk. I shouted, "Hey!" No answer. The figure slowly leaned back out of sight. I waited for footsteps. Nothing came. I barely slept the rest of the night. By morning, I convinced myself it was another camper or maybe a hunter. Still creepy, but explainable. I packed my gear early and decided to move farther north, away from the old fire road. That's when I noticed the footprints. They circled my tent. Not animal tracks. Boots. Large boots. Whoever it was had walked around my campsite for hours. There were dozens of prints in the dirt. And one set stopped right beside where my head had been inside the tent. I should have left right then. But pride does stupid things to people. I kept hiking. The trail became narrower as I climbed deeper into the mountains. By afternoon, snow started falling lightly through the trees. Ranger stayed unusually close to me the entire time. Then I found another footprint. Fresh. Right in the middle of the trail ahead of me. Same boot pattern. My stomach dropped. Someone was following me. I started walking faster. So did Ranger. Every few minutes, I'd glance behind me, expecting to finally see the person. But the trail stayed empty. Still. I kept hearing things. Branches snapping. Rocks shifting. Soft footsteps that stopped whenever I stopped. By sunset, panic was starting to take over. I found an old hunting cabin marked on my map, and decided to stay there for the night instead of camping again. The cabin was small and rotting, hidden deep in the trees. One room. Broken windows boarded shut from the inside. Rusted stove in the corner. But it had a door that locked. That mattered. I pushed a heavy table against the entrance after dark. Ranger sat beside the door, staring at it constantly. The snow outside got heavier. Then came the first knock. 3 slow taps. Knock, knock, knock. Every hair on my body stood up. I didn't move. Neither did Ranger. Another knock came a minute later. Then silence. I held my flashlight tightly and waited. That's when I heard footsteps circling the cabin. Slow. Careful. The wooden floor creaked beneath me as I backed away from the windows. The footsteps stopped near the wall behind me. Then I heard breathing. Right outside the cabin. I wanted to believe it was a lost hiker. Someone needing help. But deep down, I knew better. Because whoever was outside never spoke. Not once. Hours passed like that. Footsteps. Scratching sounds. Silence. Then around 3 a.m., Ranger suddenly growled. Low and violent. I turned my flashlight toward the back window just as a face appeared through a crack in the boards. A man. Filthy beard. Pale skin. Wide eyes reflecting the light. He smiled at me. Not normal smiling. The kind that looked empty. Dead. I shouted and rushed toward the window, but he vanished instantly. A second later, something slammed against the front door. The entire cabin shook. Another slam. Then another. Wood cracked near the hinges. Ranger barked wildly while I grabbed my hunting knife with shaking hands. The man started laughing outside. Quiet at first. Then louder. I'll never forget that sound. He knew I was trapped. The door burst open on the fourth hit. The table shoved backward across the floor. The man came inside wearing heavy winter gear stained dark around the sleeves. He held a hammer in one hand. Ranger attacked him instantly. The cabin exploded into screams and growling. I saw the hammer swing once, twice. Then Ranger stopped moving. I stabbed the man before I even realized I'd moved. Again. 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 He collapsed beside the wall, making this horrible choking sound while blood spread across the floorboards. I ran outside into the snow without my backpack, without anything. I just ran. By sunrise, I reached a ranger station nearly 7 miles away. They found the cabin later that day. The man was already dead. The police identified him as a missing hunter connected to 2 disappearances in the area from years earlier. But that isn't the part that still keeps me awake. The disturbing part was what they found in the cabin basement. Dozens of dog collars. And beneath them, a pile of human shoes. I heard the footsteps before I saw the cabin. Not behind me. Not ahead of me. They were matching my pace somewhere deep in the trees to my left, staying perfectly parallel with me for almost 20 minutes. Every time I stopped walking, they stopped too. I wish I had turned around right then. Last October, I took a solo vacation to northern Montana. I'd been dealing with stress for months and wanted somewhere quiet. No traffic. No people. Just mountains and cold air. I rented a small cabin through a travel site. The owner said it was remote but peaceful. That should have been my first warning. The drive there took almost 6 hours after leaving the airport. Eventually, the paved roads disappeared and turned into dirt paths winding through thick forest. My phone lost signal about an hour before I arrived. The cabin sat completely alone near the base of a mountain ridge. No neighboring houses. No lights. Nothing. Just trees. The owner had left the key under a flower pot. I never met him. Inside, the place looked normal enough. Small kitchen. Wood stove. 1 bedroom. There was even a handwritten note on the table telling me to lock the doors at night because wildlife sometimes wandered close. At the time, I thought he meant bears. That first night felt peaceful. Honestly, kind of perfect. Rain hit the roof softly while I drank coffee and watched fog roll through the trees outside the windows. But sometime after midnight, I woke up to a strange sound. Crunching. Slow footsteps outside. I stayed still in bed and listened carefully. The steps circled the cabin once, then stopped near the bedroom wall. Silence. I told myself it was probably an animal. Then I heard breathing. Not loud. Just faint enough to make me question if I'd imagined it. I grabbed my flashlight and moved toward the window. My hands were shaking a little, but I still pulled the curtain aside. Nothing. Only darkness and trees moving in the wind. The next morning I found footprints outside. Human footprints. Large boot prints circling the cabin. I remember staring at them for a long time, trying to convince myself they were old. Maybe from the owner. But they looked fresh. I should have left then. I know that now. Instead, I spent the day hiking nearby trails to calm myself down. The forest was incredibly quiet. Too quiet. No birds. No insects. Just wind moving through branches overhead. Around late afternoon, I noticed something strange. Every few hundred yards, there were small piles of stacked rocks beside the trail. At first I assumed hikers made them. But then I realized they kept appearing even after I left the marked path. Someone had been there recently. The sun started dropping behind the mountains, so I headed back toward the cabin. That's when I heard the footsteps for the first time. Slow. Careful. Keeping pace with me somewhere beyond the trees. I stopped walking. The footsteps stopped too. I yelled out, asking if someone was there. No answer. Just silence. Then, one single crunch of leaves closer than before. I started moving faster. So did the footsteps. For the next 20 minutes, something stayed with me in those woods without ever letting me see it clearly. Sometimes I caught movement between trees. A dark shape. Too tall to be a deer. Too controlled to be an animal. By the time the cabin came into view, I was almost jogging. I locked the door immediately after getting inside. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The flower pot beside the entrance had been moved. Underneath it, scratched into the dirt with something sharp, was a single word. Inside. I didn't sleep that night. Around 2 a.m., I heard movement again outside the cabin. Slow footsteps on gravel. Then a soft tapping against the window near the kitchen. Tap. 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 I turned off every light and crouched beside the couch holding a fireplace poker like it would somehow protect me. The tapping stopped. Then came the sound of the front door handle slowly turning. Back and forth. Very gently. Whoever was outside knew I was in there. I could hear breathing again. Closer this time. Right outside the door. Then a voice. A man's voice. Very calm. I know you're awake. I froze completely. He laughed quietly after saying it. Not loud. Just enough to sound confident. Then came footsteps moving around the cabin again. I stayed hidden for what felt like hours. Eventually, sometime near dawn, exhaustion took over and I must have drifted off for maybe 20 minutes. I woke up because of a loud bang. The bedroom window had shattered. I jumped up and saw a man climbing halfway through the broken frame. He wore dark hunting clothes and a black knit cap. His face looked thin, almost sickly. But his eyes were focused directly on me like he'd been waiting for this moment all night. I ran for the front door. Behind me, I heard him hit the floor inside the cabin. He didn't yell. He didn't rush. That somehow made it worse. I sprinted to my car and locked the doors just as he stepped outside the cabin. He stood there watching me calmly. Then he smiled. I threw the car into reverse so fast I nearly hit a tree. Gravel sprayed everywhere as I sped down the dirt road. In the rearview mirror, I could still see him standing there motionless in the middle of the road. I drove nearly 40 miles before reaching a gas station and calling the police. They searched the area later that day. What they found still messes with me. About 200 yards behind the cabin, hidden in the woods, they discovered a small campsite. Whoever had been stalking me had been living there for days. Maybe longer. There were empty food cans, cigarette butts, a sleeping bag, and dozens of photographs. Pictures of the cabin. Pictures of my car arriving. Pictures of me unloading my bags. Pictures taken through the windows at night while I slept. But the worst one, the absolute worst, was a photo taken from inside the cabin. It showed me asleep in bed the first night. Which meant one thing. He'd already been inside before I ever heard the footsteps outside.